Good morning. Another beautiful day here in Mysuru. And we're going to get started with day 4. Yeah, it's day 4. I hope you all had a good weekend and a bit relaxed to start another beautiful week. So what were we doing for the last few sessions? Talking about methodology. So I also gave for you a typical generic kind of stages of a research. And so we have to have our methodology all done and ready, and our data collection instruments, which has to wait until we have our methodology ready, and our sampling. So I think we have covered quite a bit of that. What I was thinking was maybe I would like to make a few more points about some of the research frameworks. One of them, of course, is a survey, and the other is content analysis, most often done by journalism and communications researchers. I thought that it would be useful to talk about this topic because there's still quite a bit of confusion sometimes about this methodology. The other one is the experimental method, and I don't think we may have time for that, but let's see. So content analysis, that is a very ubiquitous, a very useful research framework for us for our studies, for our research. The other day when I got a question about one of the participants asking me to tell the difference between content analysis and thematic analysis, I would like to get started with that. Content analysis can be a confusing term because it's like the 8 blind men who went to touch an elephant, and each one touched one part of the elephant and thought that was what it was. The leg, he said, oh, it's a tree trunk. Somebody hung on to the trunk of the thing. Oh, it's a rope to climb, and so on. So that is because this methodology is used in a variety of disciplines. Okay. And for example, in the area of law and order, forensic science, this is a very important, forensic science method where based on certain kinds of content, evidence, they try to analyze that. History is another one. Examination of historical documents has to be done in a scientific way, not some cursory way. Okay, so they deal with that in every humanities discipline, but they may call it by different names. So if we look at the main categories, just for sake of discussion, the quantitative research and the qualitative research. Yeah, you can consider these as two, sides of the coin. We have been talking about quantitative research the whole time. Qualitative research is, it believes in different things. There is no single reality. There is no reality beyond you. You are part of that reality. There is no one reality. There's multiple realities. Notice when we start putting all these things together, it's a very different view of the world that the qualitative researchers, So it, in many disciplines, it has given rise to very healthy research in qualitative methods, and that is the qualitative content analysis. They may not call it content analysis. You have different kinds, there's a document analysis, thematic analysis, and they follow a different view. They're not interested in numbers. In any study, not just content analysis, any study, a qualitative inquiry will involve, the process, what's going on, the culture around, and people's stories, how they feel, all of these you can get through interviews, deep interviews. And there are other methods, which I won't go into here, of collecting information. The protocol is pretty much similar in terms of define what you want to do, but there'll be differences because of the. So, the content analysis I'm going to be talking about quantitative research area. There are very good books. There's a book by Professor Krippendorf called, oh God, I'm forgetting the title. I think it's called Content Analysis, but go by the title, Krippendorf, Krippendorf, completely qualitative. And there are other good books. One of the nice things for you people compared to our generation, you can get access to some good resources online through your university, through your college, good stuff. Especially methodology books are very expensive. During our time, we had to buy them or depend on the library. And you may not get it when you want. So literally we bought all our books, expensive. But the nice thing about methodology books is you have to buy it only once. 30 years down the road, the methodology is not going to change. There may be some new, but so I would always say buy theory books, buy methodology books, put it on your shelf. It'll make you look very wise. When a student comes and opens the door, books, this man reads books. Oh, people, Plus, you don't know when you will need it. Suddenly you will have to, oh God, I need to find out about this. But these days, all of those resources are available online. And so do find your favorite material. So coming back to this, it is a research framework within the same methodology we have been looking at for the last few days. Think of content analysis, if you want a crude way of describing it, think of it as a survey of content. Okay, no human beings involved. This is an analysis of content, message content, right? Yeah. Next. So there are many, many times when we, as part of our, research or teaching, are interested in analyzing messages, message content. We have so many of them around us. During my time, it was newspapers, master's thesis and doctoral dissertations used to talk about the difference between New York Times, London Times, and our own Times of India, the coverage, how they were covered. There was a time when I had just finished my master's and I was teaching, late 1970s. At that time, the mantra was New World Communication Order. That was it. They made it NWICO, New World Information and Communication Order. This was a UN kind of thing because third world countries were complaining that only bad stories, negative stories about them are reported in the West, and there is no equal flow or even close to an equal flow between the two. And all the major news agencies were all Western agencies, blah, 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 blah. You know, now you understand what we used to do. Our publications, not mine, a lot of the people was on comparing this with that. It's an example of content analysis. I remember joining Bowling Green State University as a newly minted assistant professor. Just received my PhD, nice and shiny PhD. And I felt shivers in my body anytime somebody called me Dr. Melkote. Doctor. Yeah, doctor. You know. So I felt very good, felt very proud every day seeing that PhD by the side of my name. It went away. After some time, it'll go away. Okay. But I was a newly minted assistant professor. And the head of the department had no pity on me. He said, "Hey, Melkote, you are a researcher, aren't you?" Yeah. I have a master student. He's finished his coursework, starting his second year. He wants to write a master's thesis in international communication. You're the only logical person. I want you to be the supervisor. I think that name might be very familiar to a lot of you. His name is Arvind Singhal. Arvind was in master's program at that time. So we have a meeting, we meet. And so Arvind, what's the topic? He said, and we are looking at month of August. He said, something with New World Information and Communication Order related, flow. I said, Arvind, that topic has been researched too many times. Too many times. We don't need another study. Find something else. So he would go back. 2 weeks later, he would come in September. Topic? No. Now we're reaching end of September. Arvind, topic? You have to graduate in May. No. No topic. So time like this went on, and suddenly one day, Arvind was banging on my office door early in the morning. I say, "Hey, what's the matter? I got a topic." Okay. So what is your topic? I'm going to cover the death of Mrs. Indira Gandhi and the riots that followed in Delhi, which targeted Sikhs. How is this reported and analyzed? The same old thing, but look at the difference. How is it analyzed across USA, UK, India, and one other country, Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur Times? I'm going to look at the coverage and the analysis, and I'm going to make some research questions like, was there bias? Did the Western newspapers cover excessively the riots, the sensational element? Were they were supportive of which group? There were two groups. Sikhs was one group, and the rest of the Indians There's another group. So that was a content analysis. And he was going to use the NWICO as a theoretical thing, but he was doing a case study. I said, okay, that's fine. And so that was Arvind's, he did a great job, of course. Arvind's master's thesis. But you don't have to confine it to newspapers, right? It's a very versatile methodology. Any communication content, audio content, radio, audio, television, video content, speeches of prime ministers, presidents, you know, diaries of some people. You can do it on anything. And obviously, you can do it in a quantitative way. You can do it in a qualitative way. It all depends on what your methodology is and what your research questions are. Talking about qualitative, I'll give you an example and then I'll come over back to qualitative. I read a short description of a content analysis that was done using the qualitative methodology. So they were not looking at numbers. They were looking at more the quality of the information, the qualitative aspects of the information. The study was very unique. The researcher was going to look at the graffiti on bathroom toilet walls. This is a universal habit. I have visited many, many countries and I've gone to toilets, by the way, male toilets, and I find graffiti. Okay, something scrawled there. You know, people love to leave footprints of where they are. Even if it's a monument that is 5,000 years old, they will say, Julie loves John. And then they'll put an arrow as though I care. And they desecrate. That's okay. Let's come back to toilet walls. This researcher was going to do a analysis of the graffiti in public toilets of men and women, males and females, and was going to do a qualitative comparison. I think I gave you this example earlier of the difference. Very interesting study. What do women write on toilet walls? No. She found women tend to be more romantic. They write about romance. They write about previous lovers that didn't work out. You know, udas, very sad, you know. Men don't deal with that kind of stuff. Men talk about their body organs and how fit they are and how strong and their muscles and their sexual conquests, you know. That's what men write about. Okay, that's all I have to say. So that was, and there's much more to it, but she did content analysis of toilet walls. Now, any message content that is inscribed in some medium will be all right for a content analysis. So this researcher had to confine to only public toilets, not private toilets. Okay, so, and that's easy to do. In our case, of course, I will take 2 examples and kind of work through it. Again, I'm not going to go into any kind of a detail, but I'll go over the main idea. Yeah. Yeah, here is your standard definition for this method. It's not very different from survey if you look at it. It's a systematic. Systematic means all parts of the system have been checked. Again, go back to my building analogy. Building a building, everything has to be, all systems have to be done. And only when you complete certain systems, then you can move on to the next, and then the next. Even when you're constructing the building, you have to leave gaps for electrical wires that are not going to come for a long, long time. So imagine, I read a story about some office. After everything was done, they realized they didn't have holes for telephone wires. This was about 15 years ago. And this is a government office. So systematic means there's a blueprint. Everything is done according to that. Objective, we use that for survey also. And of course, we are going to be looking at the quantitative analysis. What I have under the definition for objective is what I have done, or what I have said before. I'm just repeating it so that we are reminded. We define our objects of study so carefully that different observers, conducting research independently can see the same thing. And we talked about definitions. We talked about operational definitions. We'll do that again today. Okay, next. One caveat here before we actually go into picking one or two topics and running through it. Latent versus manifest content. There are at least two main ways, domains that we have to look at. One is manifest. Manifest is open to all of us in this room through our eyes and through our nose, I guess through our ears, and maybe even touch. And so with these, we all can see around us. That's manifest content. Latent, on the other hand, there's many other stuff we don't know. For example, you might be sitting there and looking at me, but actually you're thinking about the argument you had with your wife this morning. How could she say that? Huh? She's not being objective. That's latent. I can't see it. And if I could get a glimpse of it, it's not going to be accurate. So content analysis is only done on manifest content. We don't go into anything for which the data is not readily available. Remember, empirical referent is a term I kept repeating in an earlier. We need empirical reference. We need to see it. We need to observe it in order to note its occurrence. I can't mind read. So that is something you need to keep in mind. But often, getting some of that latent messages is also important for a study. Understand? But we don't get it from content analysis. You have to devise another methodology to extract those kinds of information. You can run a survey along with content analysis. And you can use your survey instrument to extract other kinds of information about people, their minds, what they're thinking. So it must be corroborated with independent evidence. Okay. That's why most often in some of the big studies, you do parallelly, you also do surveys. Yeah. Okay. Now, there is a useful model in communication. We talked about it another day, the other day, Berlow's model, SMCR, source, message, channel, receiver. This was a very early model, 1920s. It was a very heuristic model in the sense that the strength of the model, it might have been a very elementary description. Though I think you got to put yourself in the shoes of early 1900s. It was a very dramatic model. This is the communication process. It can be broken down into 4, SMCR. And it makes sense. And that model was improved upon by other people. They added more components to that model. It was a very useful model, heuristic model, because it organized research studies in the discipline. So now, in this new field of communication research in the 1930s and onwards, there were some specific areas where one could go and do research. You can work on the sources of communication. Who are the sources? And we started getting studies of gatekeeper studies. What do they do? What is the nature of gatekeeping? All about the source. Plenty of studies we got in that category. So before I go on to that, let's just take an overall look at the message analysis. May I look at the next one, please? Okay, I'm going to start with this and then go on to that. So I'll start with S, source. Analysis of source. And also, later models talked about encoding as a separate aspect of that model. So the message is encoded into a signal, into a message appropriate for the medium in which it is going to be transmitted. So you can add encoding process as part of this source. Later on, the SMCR model was expanded. They added E to it, SMCRE, E being effect. And that was a very important addition because we're always looking for any impact. And so relationship between sources and their receivers through the messages. What kinds of messages, what kind of encoding process is better? We had a whole ton of studies on persuasive communication. Today, look at the communication of the advertising industry. Look at all the jingles on radio. Look at all the other, I can't even get the name, on the billboards and in printed media. Very interesting, you know. How did the advertisers know that this is the best way for a jingle or for a thing to be? Through research of the relationship between the source and the receiver through the message. These days, for example, again, this I love to add everything with my own comments. I look around, you'll see me looking at every billboard and reading every billboard. I can read at least in 4 Indian languages, billboards. But in Mysuru, you can confine yourself to English and Kannada. English is what I'm noticing these days is the first sentence will be in Hindi written in English. I'm talking of the English ads. And then English ad. They always either one line above or one line below, they will be Hinglish. Hinglish is a global language. Tamilish is a global language. Canish is another global language where you don't know whether it's English or that language written in Roman script. Very interesting. When did this come about? Not in my days. Right? Some older people. When we spoke an Indian language, we spoke that language. We didn't put English words in it. Today, it's very hard for the young generation to talk one sentence without an English word. I'm not saying that's bad, please. Who am I? I'm just observation. So message analysis tells you which worked. Apparently, that must be working. Okay. Apparently, there are a lot of people in other parts, in the non-Hindi parts, who can read the English script and understand some very cursory Hindi. So that first part will bring them in. And the second part can be for all the other groovy Indians, you know. So persuasive messages, remember World War I, World War II especially, research was thriving by late 1930s. All the names that you read about, they made their career during those days, working for propaganda messages, World War II, persuasive communication. So the content, I guess I'll talk about that when we get into the content. What is the source of a disputed document? Every once in a while, this comes about. The last book, was it written by Shakespeare? Or was it written by somebody else? That remained a disputed document. The one theory was that one of the royal people at that time, he authored that, the last thing, not Shakespeare. But content analysis showed that the author was Shakespeare. This is relationship of messages, source messages. Communication is a very important medium. Sources use it. So very tangible ends. And analysis of that would be something that we need to do. And we've been doing that. Makes content analysis. Go back to the previous one. So basically, all of this deals with all of the things we are interested in. The source, the message, the channel. Source, we want to know who the sources are, what their biases are, and how they are communicating. Today, we have very powerful social networks in the control of some people. What is their influence on that particular platform. You can't answer this through your pet political views. You'll have to do an analysis of the existing content. And then you can relate the known characteristics of those sources with the kinds of messages they produce or allow. Then we have in India, we have the Film Censors Board, right? And before you start to look at any movie, you see the certificate. What is that? There is a body that looks at every film and then gives its approval after its suggestions have been incorporated. Censor board. On what basis? There is an idea of what is appropriate to the Indian culture and audience, what is not appropriate. Sometimes, of course, politics comes into that, and we won't talk about that now. For example, the longest time, adult men and women are not shown kissing lip to lip. In the 1970s, 1980s, you never saw that. Why? Because the censor board would not allow it, right? So there is, one of the problematic things they have is people smoking tobacco, cigarettes on screen. So either you cut the scene, or you're allowed to put a message. Smoking is very bad for your health, something like that. So auditing it against certain standards. That's also done in message analysis, the content. You can also do research on the content to see how it is changing across time. Okay, across broad audiences. You can do all kinds of those kinds of things. If you look at the American television shows, the main shows to be shown during prime time up to the 1980s, you will notice that all of the stories are conventional. Man, woman, dating, living together, marriage. You understand what I mean by conventional. You never would see a show where they showed lesbian love, two women as the main characters of the story, or two men living a married life. You never saw that. Today it's common. Hit shows, right? To describe the trends in communication content across time. Okay. You can do a content analysis of television shows in US in the 1950s up to the 1960s. Black people were only shown as servants, butlers, maids, drivers. You didn't see a black person normally as an engineer or as a medical doctor. You didn't see that. Today, it's different, right? So you look at these trends in communication and you can talk about, and these are all very deliberate things. It's unfortunate that many of us just don't reflect on this. What you see is what is playing at this time, both good and bad, in society, influences. Last one. Then we have techniques of style and presentation, different types of presentation of messages, fear-producing messages used in health communication. Messages that preach, used in government documents, telling you what to do, you know. Humorous messages meant to make you laugh, so on. Which style is the best for the purpose that you're indulging in? Again, another area of research. Finally, we have the characteristics of the audience and their influence on the sources. Today, that is very important. In the past, communication used to be top-down, mostly. Source will tell the receiver, top-down. The receiver didn't have much of a chance to tell the source. The channels did not exist other than effect. But today, with the social networks, we don't have top-down. We have a much more horizontal structure where receivers have the opportunity and the means to communicate back. And today, at least I notice in the United States that people's behavior, media-related behavior, is being picked up by the mainstream legacy networks, the big networks, and they are giving rise to hybrid media that cater to this crowd, because we have a lot of people with social media, and this is hybrid media. And so you see all these hybrid media being made available, you know. So we're looking at the effects of the, it has become very important. Today, I don't know how far it is useful or being implemented. Any service that you get performed, that person will ask you to fill out an evaluation. And in the States, everything, it'll come with next day, there'll be 5 stars to 1 star. And in fact, that person before going will say, sir, you'll get evaluation tomorrow. I hope that I've done 5-star work for you. You get your car repaired. You have electrician coming and work at your house, service. And places like Amazon and other places, your review matters. Your review is important. Most of the buyers read the reviews. You will not buy something that has received a low review. You tend to go with ones that are 4-star and 4.5 star. Right? So it's very important also to know the characteristics, the reactions of the audience, and that effect on the source. So you notice that this is all over. Just skip one and that next one. And then we have something on the right-hand side of the model, the decoding and the receiver. Okay. That is also part of content analysis. It's SM we talked about, the channel, then the receiver. Who is the one who decodes the message? A message is not a message unless it has flowed to the other side. Okay. So what was the understanding? What was the comprehension? Okay. I think I may have given you a wrong example. I mean, that because that cannot be done with content analysis. You have to do it with a survey. In terms of the recipient's messages, we're looking at to what extent was the source message decoded the way it should have been decoded, the decoding process. In other words, we're looking at the flow of information from sources to receivers. For example, these days we have this new term called influencers in the social media. One name that I'm sure that jumps to everybody's mind is Kim Kardashian. Kim Kardashian is one good example of an influencer. Their claim to fame is getting a huge fan following, followers, right? And they are called influencers because the people who follow them obviously are influenced by her. And so you start seeing people with so many thousands of followers, 100,000 followers, million followers, and multi-million followers. And study the flow of information. This is very useful information for advertisers. Somebody has to pay the bill at the end of the day. It may be free to you. So advertising obviously is used a lot in these where advertisers place advertising, messages slots in between, right? And pay money for that, which subsists the process. And so those with lots and lots of viewers will obviously get lots and lots of advertisers interested in that specific audience. So it's a whole new world out there, and still the old content analysis, right? You can so it's a very ubiquitous, very useful method. Yes, please. What are some of the advantages of content analysis, or what some of the nice things that come with the package? Non-reactive measurements. In survey, one of the biggest problems we have is the reaction of the person being observed, the person being interviewed, the person filling out the questionnaire. To what extent their reaction may be part of their response. We looked at the Hawthorne effect the other day. Sensitivity of the subjects to the presence of the investigator, which is unconscious, right? That may add some systematic bias to the results. But in the case of content analysis, there's no such thing because you do not deal with human subjects. So they are non-reactive, which is good. Indirectly, you can also study the social structure, which I'll do in the last. But right now, like that famous story, where the queen used to go in front of the mirror. Lady, lady on the wall, who is the fairest of all? And the mirror would always say, you, your highness. So we also have a wall. Our wall is our media. Okay. And we look at the media a lot of the times, from morning till evening. And the media that we look at is our mirror. We form our looks, fashion, shirt, pant, hair, everything about to fit that diaspora. Okay, it's a give and take process. So you can do an analysis of social structures, just by studying the media, especially those types of situations where you cannot do it otherwise. With content analysis, you can sit in a time machine and go to 1900. You can go to 1900. And you can do studies of the society that existed, in your hometown, like Mysuru, in the 50s. Now, you do a content and of many things. You can do content analysis of newspaper stories, both politics and culture, to understand what was going on at that time. You can do content analysis of romantic literature, fiction books available, or magazines. Magazines used to be, once upon a time, extremely, popular. And magazines cover a lot of human interest stories, fiction. What was written in the 1900s in women's magazines? What was written? They'll tell you about the women of that time, their lifestyle, their position in the social structure, so on. Right? So studying the past is very, very useful. Okay. Yeah, next one. So you can use it like we do in a survey. You can have research questions. They all have to be related to the message content. You can even have hypotheses. Arvind Singhal's study was a content analysis, which was testing some research questions. I had another situation where another student ran to my office about 5 years later, sometime in 88, 89, I'm not sure. And she also did a very beautiful content analysis. In 1988 or 89, a Iranian Airbus, a full Airbus, taking off from Tehran airport, was shot down by the American Navy. Okay. And you could see dead bodies floating on the water. It was not a good scene. 5 years earlier, the Soviet Union shot down a Korean airliner, Boeing, with full passengers on board. And the president of US at that time, Mr. Reagan, called Soviet Union an evil empire. How could they do something so bad? And so on and so forth. What happened in 89 was the mirror opposite of that. This time, it was the Americans shooting it down. So she wanted to do a content analysis of the coverage given to the 1983 Korean airline bombing and 1989, the Iranian Airbus bombing. And she was going to compare the reporting of the same newspaper, New York Times was one of them, in these two. And she was going to be looking at three categories, which is popular in journalism research: reporting, inference, and judgment. So when we did our journalism long ago, we distinguished between three kinds of writing a journalist would do. One is reporting. You will just report what you observed and nothing more. And then there was inference. Inference is where the journalist, looking at the facts, will make some guess of what that is. That's an inference. And judgment goes one step further. Not only do you make an inference, but you make a judgment on it, saying that is bad, that is corrupt, that is good, etc. So she was looking at number of report sentences in the two incidents, the number of inference sentences, and the number of judgment sentences. And she made the research question, will there be more judgment in the Korean Airlines crisis than in the Iranian Airbus? You know, by American media, that is, you know. Will there be more reporting in number of the Korean airline bombing as compared to the Iranian airline bombing? You notice how you can come up with some useful content analysis. One famous name here is Dr. George Gerbner, and he did a lot of content analysis in the late 1960s on television, prime-time television, entertainment television programs. And his content analysis was confined to studying the violence depicted in the media, violence, because that was a very important issue in the United States. Kennedy was shot dead in '63. Martin Luther King was shot dead. Robert Kennedy was shot. There was a lot of this, and so are they related to the media? Is media somehow responsible for this increase in violence? Anyway, so he was looking at that. He not only did that, but he also collected other data, which in the end turned out to be more useful for communication theory that today we use than the real. Is there a relationship between the television world being the world that you see in your entertainment programs, and the real world, that is where you and I live? So is there a difference between the two, you know? And yes, there is a difference between the two. There are more shootings, more rapes, more destruction in the media than in real life. Real life as in reported incidents to the police, like murder. Murder is usually a reported incident, or rape for that matter. How much does it occur in the media story? How much does it occur in real life? Just to give you one example. Like this, he chose 100 indicators to tell us that the media world is not the same as the TV world. I'm sorry, as the real world. The media world has been constructed for you with a script. Okay? So, for example, women in the 1970s up to 70s media in shows like General Hospital, you know, these are all soap operas, you know. a lot of women are shown as medical doctors. And I'm talking of 60s and 70s. And so for a young person to be watching, you'll think, oh, there are a lot of women are doctors. What is the statistics of the number of medical doctors of women in real life? And in US, it was like 10 to 1. In real life, 1 as opposed to 10. It's true even today. 30% of doctors in the United States are Indians, Indian Americans. Either they migrated from here or they are children of the migrants. 30%. That's a big number, isn't it? Now go and count for yourself where an Indian character is in any of the medical shows from US. A main character. Just goes for you. Very low to non-existent. Right? So the media world is very different from the real world. Very useful for social analysis. This man did it. For example, he showed that women on entertainment television are more often shown as victims of violence than in real life. Like there are no brave women, you know, who will fight back or do things. The woman is, oh, and succumbing to it. And later on, he did other studies where he showed that people who are addicted to television tend to adopt the TV world as the real world. These are all important theories of the 60s and 70s and 80s in the field of mass communication. All came through content analysis. Something similar to that is assessing the image of the minorities in a society. Okay, how are they? Just depiction of Black people in the 1950s television and movies. Okay, it was a very stereotyped. The same thing for other smaller groups, religious groups, language groups. It can be minority on anything. So, in other words, I've made my case that content analysis next one, is a very useful method. It can be done very well if the data are available, if you have a good library or access to one. It's safe to do. You don't have to be walking the streets. You can be sitting inside an office, preferably an air-conditioned office, even in the night, you know. It's so, and it is easy to do. If with a good supervisor, it is easier to do. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, I want to go down a few steps of a content analysis project. I'm getting into methodology because I have some extra time and I can go into the method itself. If I were to choose an example of a printed media, okay, these are the steps. Not very different from what we saw in the survey. You have to come up with your questions. You have to define your population from which you're selecting the sample. Usually in content analysis, you always select the sample because of the vast amount of content that is available. And then it'll get a little different because we're dealing with messages, you know, number 4, number 5, number 6, and so on. Yeah, next one. So what's step 1? Step 1 is always step 1. Come up with your questions. That could flow from theory, could also flow from experience, like in the case of Dr. Arvind Singhal. something that's going on around you. Okay, so the one that I'm selecting, yeah, let's go to the next one. Is this the next one? Yeah, look at the earlier one. Yeah, okay, go to that. So for the newspaper, we are going to select, like, say, you want to compare two newspapers based on how they are covering the ruling party. Okay. And to answer questions like, is the newspaper biased in favor of the ruling party? Are they, not? Because there's a lot of talk about that. Okay, let's do a study. Let's do a study and find out. Let's not sit and discuss it. And so let's go ahead and do a quick study. You can do that on television too. George Gerbner was looking at the amount of violence between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. and the quality of the depicted violence. That was his content analysis on the TV media. Yeah, next one. Now, just like in the case of a survey, you have to come up with a sample. There is a population from which you have to select the sample. Remember, population is the messages. Everything in content analysis has to do only with content. Exactly the same thing that I discussed earlier in the case of random probability sampling and non-random probability sampling earlier applies here. It's the same method. From your population available, if it's too big, you will have to select. Do you want to select a random probability sample or a non-probability sample? It all depends on what you want to do. If you want to take your studies results and generalize it to that newspaper, not just for the limited time period in which you looked at the messages, but in general, like all the time, this is what they do. Then what you're doing is you're generalizing from your results of your study back to the whole population of that population. And you're allowed to do that only if you work with a representative sample. You can do that. If you choose a non-representative sample, then all you can do is just describe very well what you found and make some guarded statements. Yeah, next. As you can see, taking newspaper as an example, if I were to compare two newspapers, then I have to look at the population of that newspapers. I may be interested in looking at analysis of the newspaper content over a limited period of time, last 1 year. But that newspaper must have been around before that. So population is all the copies of the newspaper ever printed. That's the population, right? But in the case of content analysis, you can break the population into smaller categories. Instead of looking at 50 years, you can say population of newspapers of that newspaper in the last 5 years. You can reduce the population to a smaller number. But even your 5 years would be a very long period because a newspaper is printed almost every day. And newspaper has more than one page. they can quickly add up, and each page has more than one story. It can add up very quickly into hundreds and hundreds. So sampling, for example, population last 1 year, 365 issues. But 365 issues is a lot. And so using a research handbook, you will choose a smaller number. Okay. Like, let's say 300, 365, right? So let's do a 50% sample. Something like around 180 issues. So how are you going to select those 180 issues? Same as we did in the case of survey, probability sampling. Give every newspaper, every date of that newspaper an equal chance of being selected. So time period gets very important in these kinds of things. And okay, so selection. So now we have 180 newspapers. Sometimes you can also stratify it. Remember, we talked about a stratified sample. Instead of looking at a certain number of newspapers over 365 days, I will stratify them by the day of the week. Monday newspaper, Tuesday newspaper, Wednesday, 7 days of the week. I will have 7 groups. From them, I will sample, probability sampling. If you suspect that the medium looks different each day, it happens in the case of, used to happen in the case of television. Favorite programs used to come on Thursday. Boring programs used to come on Tuesday. And Saturday and Sunday was a completely different schedule. So the day of the week mattered, right? So for entertainment programming, Sunday through Thursday was actually Monday through Thursday. Weekends was not important. So in those situations, you can stratify. You can do a lot of things. Of course, I already jumped a few hoops and I named some newspapers, newspaper 1, newspaper 2. But you may have to start, first of all, by defining what is a newspaper. Okay. And then on what are you reporting? Your study is about political reporting, or is it about cultural reports? Is it about economic? No, I'm looking at bias. Okay, you're looking at what bias? Cultural bias? Political bias? No, I'm looking at political bias. Okay. So you have to explicitly say what your study is about. It is political bias. And then give examples related to, this is what I say is political bias, some examples. Okay, so you have to make all of these things, very clear. In the case of so the selection of the population sample will differ for each medium. So for example, in the case of television programs, I will still start with a population, last 1 year. And then I have to specify, the specific stations that I'm selecting and why, and the time during the day that I'm looking at over this time period. All of these things have to be done carefully. And I told you just now, in the case of television, Gerbner took his sample on the day basis. So he would make sure that the days of the week were equally represented in his sample. Okay. We talked of multi-stage sampling in another class where you have to sample one after the other. We are seeing examples, not only population in terms of newspapers, but population in terms of political reporting, because once you have chosen your newspapers, you'll have to say which page 1 or page 14. Okay, page 1. Why? Because most political reporting comes on page 1. Right. Okay, page 1. Okay, now I'm on page 1. What do I look at? There are many stories there. There's one main story about, flooding in Kerala. Am I going to select that for my study? No, I'm not going to. Unless there is some politics in that, I'm going to select only political stories. So all the stories on that page may not be selected, but all the other stories that fit your definition will be selected. So there are so many selections before you actually come to one single story. It's different in the case of television. There are no stories in television. We have scenes in television. Or yesterday I gave you, George Gerbner used any character with a speaking part will be analyzed. Speaking part. What is speaking part? Opening your mouth and saying one word. That's a speaking part. If there's a crowd scene where people are walking and thing and they don't open their mouth, they are not included. Right? So to make it very objective, and then you analyze whatever you want to analyze. I explained this in the case of television. So selection of dates, stratification, all of those are important, both newspapers and other media. And social networks will come somewhere in between these two in the methodology. Yeah. So I guess I'm 2 steps ahead of myself, ahead of my notes, PowerPoints here. This is what I was telling you some time ago. You have to select your issues for the year. These are all methodology issues that you have to keep in mind. Yeah, next one. Yeah. Front page, I told you. No. So that's an example of that, yeah. So both in television or any medium for that matter, you have to go through this selection, or what I call as sampling process. And again, is it going to be a probability sampling or a non-probability sampling, and why? There is nothing like one correct method here. You must always say, answer the question, why? Why are you doing this? Sometimes it's not feasible to do one or the other. What's the next one? One more. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm taking some liberty in rearranging the slides. I would like to talk first about this, select the recording unit. No. So in the case of the newspaper, I have many recording units. First of all, I'm looking at political stories. How do you know something is a political story? I'm going to read the headline. And when I read the headline, I get an idea that it is a political story. That story is included. Okay. Okay. So you have to come up with one rule. Then I have my X number of stories selected by that method. Now what am I going to do? I'm going to read every story sentence by sentence. So my recording unit is going to be one sentence. And I'm going to read the sentence and make analysis. And then read the next sentence, make analysis. And go on until the end of the story. And then go to the next selected story and so on. So some people use the entire paragraph as a recording unit because they're interested in theme. They're doing a thematic. So one paragraph is pretty good at a time. So some studies have used just the headlines, the entire story. No, just read the headline and that itself is. So recording unit has to be specified. Okay, now we can go two back. Yeah. Yes. One more. Back. Okay, next one. So construct content categories. So now that I'm looking at each sentence, I need what we call as content categories. These all have different names. Think of baskets in your mind. Think of a basket where you put paper. Okay, so my study is about reporting between one newspaper and another, political, how it reports the ruling party. That is my study. So I would have in my methodology come up with the reporting is going to be positive. The reporting is going to be negative. The reporting is going to be neutral. So I would have done that. These are the categories. Positive sentences, negative sentences, neutral sentences, not related sentence. So each sentence I read, I make a judgment based on my training and definitions given, looking for certain specific bias words that seem to say that the person that is a reporter is for or against, or making an inference, making a judgment, all of those, and then you will drop that into the one basket called positive. You'll count it once. If there is some conflict in that sentence, you may have to read the next sentence and come back to the first sentence and see where the drift is and make a decision and then drop it in one of the boxes. You do this every time until the very last one. Now that's your data now. In the case of television, same thing. Every character with a speaking part. Stop your tape and see who is that? Man, woman, adult, child, aggressor, victim, type of violence, punching in the face or hitting with a baseball bat. Who is the aggressor? You can get a lot of information on all the speaking parts. And all of that content categories you keep, under gender, male, female, you'll enter either male or female. Under aggressor and victim, you will have two categories there. And so content analysis can get very specific and very complex, but the idea is very simple. Emergent coding and a priori coding. Emergent coding is sometimes you may have to look at the data. After you've collected the data, run through the data, and then talk about what would be a good category to categorize these sentences. That is emergent coding. But most of the time in research methods, we do all of this thing beforehand. It's a priori. So these categories are all set up. Arvind had set up his categories. The other lady had set up her categories. And then that's how content analysis is done. Yeah. Obviously, the content categories have to be very useful. They must be able to help you answer the research question. Otherwise, what's the point? So the relevance of they must be exhaustive. You must look at all categories. You shouldn't have one sentence that doesn't fit anywhere. That's why we have one basket called other. Other is beautiful. Anything that that it has to go into one of the categories or not related. And of course, the baskets, the categories themselves must be mutually exclusive. They shouldn't overlap. All right. Okay, let's move on. All right, we are going to, after this, I already did this, didn't I? So we'll take a break here. And after the break, we'll finish this and then we'll move on to research ethics. Thank you.
புரியுதா? வாங்கிக்கலாம், ஒன்றும் பிரச்சனை இல்லை. நம்ம சேட்டா யாருக்கு வச்சா எடுத்துக்க வேண்டியதுதான். ஏய், ம், ம். கொஞ்சம் எடுத்துக்கணுமா? சரிதான். ம். அதெல்லாம் கண்டிப்பா. என்ன வேலை வாங்கணும்னா புது ஸ்காலர் இப்பதான் 2 நாள் ஆச்சு. அந்த பொண்ணு வந்து இவங்க ஜெப்ரியோட மேமோட ஸ்காலர், மேம் வந்தாங்கல்ல அவங்களோட ஸ்காலரு. ரேஷிதா அவங்க ஸ்காலர் தானே, அதனால வந்தோடனே பயங்கரமான டிகாஷன் இருக்கு போலயே. ஏன் எனக்கு போதும். ஆரம்பிச்சு சார். டாக்டர் தான். சிபிஎஸ்சி அவன் அப்பா
Okay. Okay, then let's continue and finish this topic and move on to ethics. I was talking about the recording unit, so these are different examples of what you're going to be looking at to collect your data. Yeah, next one. The context unit is this is related to what I said earlier, whether you want to select a paragraph or a sentence as your recording unit. I have used sentences a lot. Using of single words may not be useful because the word really doesn't make sense without the context of the sentence. Yeah. You do this for television too. It's the same thing. And then once your content categories at the end of your data collection, data analysis, coding, you will have a lot of numbers in each content category. For example, if it's your variables are going to be nominal, like male, female, you'll have two categories, male, female. It's a nominal variable. You can also have, it all depends, but you have to set it up now. Do you want to collect ordinal data? Do you want to collect ratio level data? You know, if you're looking at ratio level data in the case of newspapers, you might want to use the length of the column, the size of the story. That's one example for you. You can also talk about number of sentences that were positive, number of sentences that were negative. That's number is And that is also a ratio level variable. Yeah. Ordinal data can also, for example, George Gerbner, when he looked at violence, he also looked at quality of violence. And he had two categories for quality of violence. Actually, he may have had more than two. I think it was more than two. Minor violence, moderate violence, and major violence. And he gave examples of what minor violence is. So if you collected data that way, then you have an ordinal category. He found in his study that there was quite a bit of violence. When you compared violence in real life with the TV world, they found that in the major violence category, the TV world had significantly more violence in terms of murders, in terms of big crimes. But when it came to minor violence, found that in reality, there was quite a bit of violence there. People hair being pulled, being punched, being slapped. It all depends on what you define as minor violence. So all of this enumeration system, you have to set it up ahead of time. You cannot do it after your data is collected, like the example of the building is constructed and now you cannot put telephone wires because you'll have to go into places that, it's impossible. You should have done it earlier. Okay. Yeah. So another caveat is that something I talked about earlier. In content analysis, you can only infer from the content that you have looked at. All right. For example, you cannot say that this type of a content I found will have this kind of effect. You don't know because you did not do an impact analysis. So content analysis is confined to a description analysis of the content that you looked at. So when George Gerbner started saying things about how people who watch excessive amount of television addicted, it impacts them in a different way than those people who are light viewers. Addicted viewers tend to think of their world as shown in the TV world as compared to the light viewers. Now we are talking about the impact. He could only have done that if he also did surveys along with the content analysis, where you will actually survey people looking at the different types of content that they are taking in, what kind of effect it had on them. And the other thing that I made very clear, or at least I hope I did, surveys and content analysis can only give you correlational data. They cannot give you causal data. Experiment is the only method you can get data that establish cause and effect. Content analysis and surveys, you cannot. So whatever results you come up with is just a correlation. Okay, that is, and here, George Gerbner actually made some serious mistakes. Even a man of the stature of George Gerbner, if you read his cultivation analysis theory very carefully when you go back to your office, you will notice that the man is slowly creeping into causal implications when he should not be, because he only did a content analysis. For example, he said from his content analysis that people who were exposed to a lot of excessive exposure to television seem to believe that the world is a very cruel and violent place. Okay. Through surveys, he got the information that, when it's downtime, when the sun goes down, then there are all kinds of restrictions on walking outside, doing things. It's better to be safe inside the house, and that matches with that violent world. He showed how in a 1-year duration, this many murders in the TV world, this many rapes in the TV world, So it's a very violent world. And so people, excessive viewing of this seem to have that impact. Okay. But it is only correlational data. Higher the average level of viewing, the more extreme the perception is about the extent of violence in society. It's just correlation. But George Gerbner, his entire cultivation analysis is not correlational, it is causal. In fact, the term cultivation itself is, so television cultivates the impact, its impact. So people who are high on this are also high on this, and therefore television is responsible for that cause. And that is one serious weakness of cultivation analysis. I could make an argument here that I could reverse that equation and still it'll be okay. That's what will happen with correlational data. With correlational data, you can't say one is causing the other because you can flip them around. So I can make the argument that people who are afraid tend not to go out in the nights, evenings. They tend to stay at home. So we can have fear as one variable, the level of fear, which is the same thing as this variable, level of fear. I can have that. And then I find that people with higher fear, okay, tend to stay at home at dusk and nighttime as compared to people with lower fear. So people who are more afraid tend to watch more TV. The other way around now. Because when you're alone at home at night, what do? So easy to turn the TV on, right? Especially when you have children at home. Turn the TV on. So we don't know. Probably Gerbner is correct, but he didn't do a causal test. So only correlational data can be obtained, and be very mindful that correlation does not imply causality. It's a prerequisite, but does not imply. You have to do a further test. And also, in your research questions, you would have operationally defined everything. So whatever you find, you have to relate it back to your operational definition and not something else. You have to confine yourself within what you said you will do. Okay, next one. No, stop. Yeah. So, this goes into all mathematical formulas, so we don't have to do that, but it will remain on the PowerPoint slides, which eventually you'll get a copy of that. All right, if you don't mind, can you go on to this one? No, just close this. This one PowerPoint, yeah, there you go. So let's go ahead and shift the gear a little bit and pick up another topic as our last topic on the methodology. This doesn't come under methodology at all. This is related to the overall practice, and it's very important in every profession, whether it is journalism or engineering or medicine. It doesn't matter what profession you are. You have to abide by a code of ethics. So let's go ahead and examine that within our own field. Go ahead. Ethics is very important because it deals with the question of right versus wrong way to do something, appropriate versus inappropriate, for example, practice of research can sometimes, if you're not ethical, have negative consequences on the participants. So these days, university level research and other academic research, they have within the protocol, they introduce something called, in US, they call that as Human Subjects Review Board. So any study that requires human subjects, this board has to look at your proposal and okay it. They want to make sure that your whole study, for example, the people that you're going to be using in your study, how are they being treated, in an ethical way, unethical way, especially children in research. Usually they have two committees, one for how animals should be treated in your research, and the other one is how humans. We don't deal with animals, but other disciplines may deal with animals, humane treatment. And many times, if you're not very careful, you may realize that what you're doing is unethical. And as I go over some of the ideas here, you'll notice that it's quite easy to be unethical without even knowing it. Okay. Yeah, continue. There are some, actually there's more than one glaring experiment of unethical. But just to take one example from the US, the Tuskegee experiments done long time ago by the government on soldiers. No, not soldiers. On African Americans and not soldiers, just regular citizens. So these Tuskegee experiments were where they drew blood from people and used that for unethical practices. Like we are going to be looking at sexually transmitted diseases and taking blood, and we are going to diagnose for certain sexually transmitted diseases. And it was found much later on that after they drew blood, they didn't tell some of the participants that they actually had a sexually transmitted disease. Some they told, some they did not tell. And they followed through with their study just to see how that sexually transmitted disease develops and matures, which is a no today. You can't do such things. Okay. They're bad. Anytime, and you're old enough to know that anytime you do something bad, it will have a future effect. It'll create an image. It'll create, and that is not good. You want people to do research. You want people to agree to participate in your research. It must be a healthy, positive experience, not something that will diminish and demean. Remember that famous experiment from the 1950s that was done in introductory psychology classes? They're testing all these psychological traits, in people. And so your self-esteem, that's one of them. I can give you many self-esteem, and then whether you're the type who easily agrees or is stubborn. I don't know the name for it right now. See, all of these was being studied, and so this experiment is where a full professor, an older person, a lot of the time a male, will call out a student in a psychology 101 class and say things like, you see the switch here I have in front of me? There's a green switch and a red switch. Now, if you turn on my command, if you turn the red switch on, then there is a person in the next room. He will get an electric current shock. On the other hand, if you press the green switch, nothing will happen. And, across the room, you can actually hear that person. Hello, Paul, how are you? Oh, I'm doing fine. Okay, are you ready? Yeah, Paul is ready. So you call people one. And the professor will, it's a very complex study, different types of commands, and then also substituting between an older professor and a younger person, a woman and a man. They're looking at people's tendency, to respect authority. So if I tell you, come here, press the green switch, how easy and after telling you that you're going to be giving electric current, what are the chances that you will or you will not? Suffice it to say that larger number, in many situations, press the green switch, and that person there is a trained actor, and he can see which one you pressed, because the red light will go off, green light will go off. When the red light goes off, he makes appropriate noise, or something like that. This is a very simple study. It actually is done in many complex forms. And then you get a score. Under different conditions of leadership, the tendency for people to believe authority, This is all used in persuasive communication. Otherwise, why do we have Amitabh Bachchan on an advertisement? Why not me? Why not some other? Because, source credibility. If those people say things, they have better ability to persuade. So sources have some control depending on who they are. Now, we're talking about ethics now. So let's talk about the ethics part. After the study, Paul is asked to join for a cup of coffee. Paul, come. Paul is okay. Paul is happy. You see, nothing happened to Paul. Paul was not wired, nothing. Paul was just sitting there and enjoying himself. Okay? So go home now. If you pressed the green switch and all that, don't feel bad about it, because nothing happened to Paul. No. And because it is mentally and emotionally very disturbing. Suddenly you discover something about yourself. I'm sure you've seen in movies where the villain tells that guy, "Usku goli se maro." Then immediately, Are you that type? You know, and suddenly you realize that under some very tight conditions, I can do it. I can be a sadist. I don't want, what was the need for me to know that? In our personality structure, we are many, many things. Most of them we won't know. But in certain situations, they will come up. Okay? So I am one of those people. And that's not nice. The researcher has no right on my life, on me as a human being, you know. So these are ethical practices. So many times you don't even know that you're hurting people. Okay, so basically then, what should the guiding principle of ethics be? Very simple. You balance the needs, the interest, the practices, the benefits that you're going to get from your research with the welfare of the participants, okay, or the community. You have to look at them too. And you must prevent or minimize any negative consequences to them because of your study. This is the guiding principle of ethics. Yeah, next one. Okay, this is why be ethical. I won't get into that. We talked about this. It's good to be ethical because it's the right thing to do. And also the image of yourself and your profession, you know, is very important. In fact, that Tuskegee experiment had negative effects on Black Americans for a very long time. When HIV/AIDS broke out in the 1980s, and the Black community was quite badly hit by HIV/AIDS, they widely believed that the reason for that is not because of their sexual practices that is leading to that, but it's a conspiracy theory, what some leaders today call as fake news. It's a conspiracy theories invented, okay, by others to hurt the Black population. And one of the sources was the Tuskegee experiment. When if they could do that in the 1950s, they can do that in the 1980s too. So they didn't believe initially many of the stuff coming out of HIV/AIDS research. Next one. These are some of the theories that are used. The deontological theory is very simple. Do unto others what you would expect them to do to you. Use that as your standard. The utilitarian theory says balance the needs of your research, what you're doing, with the benefits of the participant. Don't put them to danger or harm. Of course, there's one relativistic. It all depends on the specific situation. You just have to be, you know, there's nothing like a universal definition. You have to focus and you have to be aware on your exact study, and you have to devise ethical methods. Yeah, next one. What are some common ethical practices that we use in research? I'm sure you all have done a study or two or more than that. You have used some of these or all of these, you know, principles. One is autonomy. Autonomy is that your participant, whoever that might be, in your survey, in your experiment, has autonomy. He or she is a whole person. They have a life. They're real people. Okay? You have to recognize that and treat them as such. Every participant has to be treated with dignity, has to be treated properly. All of this comes why? Because they have autonomy. Right? And obviously, beneficence. You have to scan your entire study to make sure that everything that is being done may benefit the participant. You must tend towards that. And the opposite is non-maleficence. Make sure that anything that you're doing, saying, doesn't harm them. So these are principles that are built into the study. Justice, defined as anybody who's equal on a certain trait has to be treated equally. That's all. Okay? That is called justice. For example, if you're looking at male-female participants, then they have to be treated the same way. Okay? So justice basically is another way of looking at autonomy. People who are equal on something must be treated the same way. This, and the last principle, of course, is after the study is done, you have to debrief. You may not be able to tell them everything before collecting data because it might sensitize them. So after that, they have to be told all the necessary information immediately after the study and completely. All right. This is what we did. This is the thing, and this is what we're going to be using it for. And you even have to promise to give all of them access to the results of the study. Yeah. Now, I'm sure this is very common in India too, but in the US, there are some federal guidelines for human subjects research. And the HSRB, the Human Subjects Review Board, or some other board with the same thing, will look into your proposal. Go through that. You may have to, if you're doing a survey, you may have to give them a copy of your questionnaire. And some surveys in general are okay, but sometimes there could be a red lining. If you're doing a survey on illegal drug habits, the word illegal is already there. So the participants are giving you information about their use of substances that are illegal. If their identity is out, then you're unnecessarily dragging them into danger. So those such studies are usually permission is not given, like that. They look for. Again, what are some of the ethical problems that we normally run into and we have to be aware? Voluntary participation and informed consent. In a survey, you have to tell them very clearly that your participation in my survey is completely voluntary. You have been selected through this process. And you have to give them all the not all, as much information as necessary about your study before they can say yes or no. Okay. Then if that person says, yeah, I will participate, then that's okay. You cannot force people. In fact, we also have to state that your participation in this survey is not only voluntary, but you may exit your participation at any time. Concealment, not telling everything, that would be concealment. And that also, you have to be very careful with that. Sometimes, as part of your research, you may have to conceal, in the sense that the dependent variable, you don't want to tell them what you're looking for. Some of those things might be okay, but some other things that must be told, must be told. Some simple thing, very simple. Hello, sir, we're doing a telephone interview, okay? It'll only take 5 minutes. But it actually won't take 5 minutes. It's actually, it'll take 15 minutes. No, you have to tell them it'll take 15 minutes. Simple things like that. Deception, of course, is carrying concealment further. Deceiving people, deliberately giving wrong information. That's deception, like they did in the Tuskegee experiments. Or there are many examples of bad ethical practices. A bunch of students in college, they submit their, they set up this. We are accepting papers for an award or whatever. So please submit. And ask them to submit an abstract or a short paper, whatever. After they submit the paper, the reviewer will savagely criticize them. That one. I mean, everything is pointed and very bad criticism, savage. All right. There is no rewards, nothing. This is the whole thing is set up. And then when it's returned to them, they are looking at the effects or something like that. The study is about something else. But that is total deception. There was no award. There was no nothing. They were guinea pigs for an experiment to see how they will react to very negative review. It's bad, bad, bad. It's bad written all over it. Another thing is privacy. All of us have autonomy. All of us have privacy rights. And you have to respect a person's privacy rights. All right. And that can be tricky depending on your research, but that has to be kept in mind. I had a lot of difficulty in the 1980s doing HIV/AIDS research, because one of the important variables we had to do at that time was people's knowledge of HIV/AIDS. In other words, how is it transmitted? How do you get it? Those days, that was very important. So we had to. And medical science told us that at this time, sexual behavior is the only way it happens, and it can be controlled. There are no medicines. There is no vaccine, nothing. And they said a few things like homosexual sex, blood transfusion, faulty blood. In other words, it can only be transmitted through very intimate physical contact. So we had to come up with communication campaigns talking about, good practices, bad practices. For example, if you shared your towel with somebody who has HIV/AIDS, you will not get HIV/AIDS. But if you share a bed, you may. You get the difference? And so you can you can swim in the same swimming pool with somebody who has HIV/AIDS. You can play basketball with them. So, but the problem was, when I did the study, how do I get knowledge about their sexual practices? You know, it's very difficult. How do I ask those questions? It was very hard. I mean, we got around it. So that's because that is privacy communication. You can't get into those areas. Last but certainly not the least, one of the things that we assure our probability samples questionnaire people, we give them anonymity. No information about you, your ID, your name is being collected. We just have a code number on top, questionnaire number. So your responses are anonymous. Means that it will not be tied back to you. Sometimes people mistake this for confidentiality. Anonymity is not confidentiality. They say, oh, the results of this study will be confidential. No. The results of this study will be published in a paper, in a journal, presented at a conference. The results won't be confidential, but we're not going to tell who said that. We don't have that information. So we are going to obviously make it public, but you will remain anonymous because we only deal with aggregate data. We don't look at each person. We collapse them into groups, and then we look at male versus female, young people versus older people. So that's the other thing. Anonymity versus confidentiality. I think we are coming, oh yeah. All of this time, I've been talking to you about collection of data, some aspect of that. But research doesn't end with that. No, it goes to other aspects that are part of data collection, analysis, and reporting. Don't fudge with the numbers you got on your questionnaires. Don't change them. Okay? There's another no, don't do that. It's stupid, actually. Because you really don't know. You might, when you look at your questionnaires, say, oh my God, look at these answers. And this is not what I expected. Bad luck. Don't change. Because who knows, you might actually find out in the end something that you never have known from these answers. Just let it go. Do not tamper with the data. If you tamper with the data, your committee will find out. At least the members of your committee who are not sleeping. I had a very, quote unquote, bad reputation where I was teaching. If you had male quote on your committee, when it comes to the statistics and reading, you have to cross all your T's and dot all your I's. Because he's going to stop you and say, why are you doing this? You know, and especially after you collect the data, wait a minute. I see a difference here and here. How did that come about? If you tamper with the data, it'll come out easily. Okay? If your study is done well, your data are like your fingerprints. Okay? And if you start manually changing them, to an observer, it'll show, right? Plagiarize, of course. Plagiarize. Don't use somebody else's stuff and make it your own. That is, of course, a no-no. Conceal important information in your analysis, in your reporting. Are you concealing some bad findings? You know, or sometimes you may even be fabricating data. Oh, there are so many examples of very famous studies. Of late, I don't know if you guys have been following how leading journals are retracting a lot of the articles, taking it back in all fields, from biology to communication. Articles are being pulled because that person had done something which will come under both analysis as well as reporting. So this is very, very important. Don't touch the data. Just report the data as is. Some good practices is share your data. Don't give your data file to somebody, but you can share it in some fashion through your papers, through other ways. And this one, the last one, is very important. When you're writing up your reporting, conclude only from what your data told you. Don't start saying things other than what your data tells you. This is difficult for beginning researchers. They tend to go out of the thing, but you can only report about the significance, you know, of your study. Yeah. Do we have another one? These are some criticisms, you know, made by a lot of the qualitative critical scholars on quantitative information, but it can happen everywhere. So I guess this is a good way to end our thing. We started out by saying that social science research methods are objective. We strive our best. Now, the criticism is that is a myth, some people say. I think the truth is more in between, that the researchers are really not neutral here. They have their own, they have staked their own positions, you know. And so critical scholars sometimes cast doubt on the results. There's another criticism that a lot of research, you know, is not critical of its sponsors. Somebody who's feeding you, you don't want to slap the hand that is feeding you, right? So the sponsors themselves may set certain framework within which you have to operate, particularly in corporate research, you know, and you might end up serving the interests of your sponsors. And that is something you have to reflect upon. And the overall criticism that can be made at all times is people don't live in soap bubbles. This is my mother expression. People don't live in soap bubbles. People live in real societies, right? And real societies are set in historical time, culture, language. That's it. And so this cultural relativity can produce changes in, you know, the way people talk, the way the people behave, you know, and obviously one has to keep this in, very much in. mind. For example, my advisor used to always relate this one incident. My advisor was from West Africa, from the country of Malawi. He did a lot of research in Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. And he used to relate all these things to us in class. It was so much fun. There was one that he used to call the conspiracy of courtesy. There's an article, if you can find that, please read it. It's called the conspiracy of courtesy. All these Western researchers would end up in some part of Africa, like Everett Rogers and other people, and throw questionnaires, and people would, come back. And these guys would then put them in books, and which master students like us had to read in the 70s. And for example, he said in Africa, when somebody comes into your village or into your office, somebody who doesn't belong there, usually it's a foreigner from University of so-and-so, USA, comes and gives you a questionnaire or administers your questionnaire through an oral interview. Treat that person as your guest. How do you treat a guest? With courtesy, right? You don't yell at your guests. As long as they are there, you treat them well. So that's what they used to do. He said, I know it because I used to work. They will tell the researcher whatever they want to hear. Social desirability bias is something I talked to you about yesterday or day before yesterday. You just tell them what they want to hear. And that is the cultural part of that, because that person is your guest. Or why do you want to wash dirty linen in the public? This is something that concerns us. Why do you want to discuss that with a stranger? No. So, but this conspiracy of courtesy was practiced everywhere. And these guys were getting wrong answers and then writing books on that. Mass media has so much effect. Mass media is so strong and all of that. Later on, we found mass media were not strong. Family bonds, caste connections, community connections were stronger. But they couldn't get that because they had all defective data. All right, any more? Okay, that will conclude ethics, and I'm done. Do you have any questions?
Sir, I have a question. What is the guarantee that the sample that I am collecting, it is true representative of the whole population? How true representative is being ensured? True representation of sample. Population.
That's a valid methodology question, and that's all built into the principle of probability sampling. Okay, so if you're looking at how the person was selected to be in your sample, is based on probability sampling. So any errors would come from the how well you did the probability sampling. If your population was very clearly mapped out, and from that population you did an accurate probability sample, then you can calculate statistically the amount of error in your study, statistically. And you can reduce the error by using different types of probability sampling. The best is stratified sample. Okay. And there are methods available in statistics of reducing the error. So your question can be answered within probability statistics methodology. For example, the larger the sample size, the less the error. A sample size of 100 is going to be inferior to a sample size of 500. Even a national population, you don't need a sample more than 2,500 for a national population. For example, political polls, some of the larger ones will be about 2,500. So there's an upper limit to that. But small samples tend to have more error because of sampling error. So it has to be tackled through that, and you can easily get the different indicators of error. If you chose a probability sample, you can actually compute them. And we try to keep them within a certain limit in quantitative studies. That's why we run those significance tests, that the results of this study can only occur 5% or less times. So we make it very difficult, but you cannot eliminate it.
Professor,
Which one is that?
also, how the researcher can avoid it?
I have only one advice for you, and it's called good luck. So it's very hard, seriously. And you want to make sure that whatever you're saying, you think is correct, done right. So you don't want any random errors in your study, but some systematic errors because of the bias of your sponsor. It's much harder. And in my communication and development book, we do refer to many examples of how this kind of error, the sponsor itself, examples of the Nestle Food Company and their, the kinds of babies they chose and what they said. It's all, so there are many of those, very hard. So you need to look at it carefully, your study. The other one is elaborate on how to overcome issue of plagiarism while referring to others' work. This is very easy today. give it to some AI, and they will do it. But in my days, it was easy to find out. In the last 20 years, they have made it very difficult to plagiarize because they have all this software that will go and that will actually compare your, language to other studies done all over. So today, as a teacher itself, I saw this happening where I could submit that essay to a plagiarizing thing, and that would tell me so many sentences were taken off of this article from this journal. So these days it's very hard. In fact, things have become so bad, I cannot plagiarize myself. So when I write an article, it would come under, this is a heavily plagiarized article. So I'm said, oh my God, I go, where is it? For my own work. Self-plagiarism also is not allowed in many places. So it is easy these days with technology, quite easy. But even before technology, as a university teacher, evaluator, as a reviewer for research papers, it was not very hard to pull out the very bad apples. Okay. For example, you're a student and you have written an article, written a paper for me. I know you for one semester. I know how you write. And the language that you use, your grammar, everything, if it's used consistently, can tell me this is not you. This is not the kind of language that you would write, And so these kinds of things, because the way we write actually is our signature. We have a style. Remember, in content analysis, we looked at, forensic content analysis. Who is the author of this paper? And then they did forensic content analysis and they found who the real author is. So I have had many situations where I have found, suddenly the student is writing like somebody from a published article in Journalism Quarterly. Not that he or she cannot write, that's not the issue. But I know that person. Okay, so other times it's just your good luck that you just come up with a piece that is completely plagiarized. When you teach a class or a paper or anywhere, be friendly with your network, the other professors, colleagues in other departments, in other colleges, other universities. Be part of a network. And once a paper came, I talked to the other professor who was teaching international communication. I said, hey, Hal, I got this paper. It is so interesting, written by so-and-so. And Hal tells me, really? The same student has written a very good paper for me too. So we both looked at the paper. It's the same paper with a different title. Of course, that is kind of silly, to do something like that. But anyway, to be serious, these days software is available. Other than that, it's pure common sense and experience to catch a bad apple. Yeah, you're right. With AI, of course, we have it's a game changer. Okay, so it's going to get more and more and more difficult, but then AI brings its own challenges again.
Thank you. So far, we went through question and answer sessions. So we are going to have a small, we are going to take a small time of you to show how to install SPSS. We already sent the links to all of you. Hope all of you have downloaded already. We'll go and show some video here. So you kindly follow it. I try to explain. If you have any difficulties in between, we try to fix it. Yeah. Hope kindly go through the video. Question and answer down. Yeah. No, Zoom. Hello. Zoom, where is Zoom? Wait. Pravitesh. Yeah, so I think if you have already downloaded that visuals, I'll just follow this method. Yeah, go play. Once you download it, just go to that particular file. You will get 3 file in it. And I will just copy that software to somewhere in the your space like desktop or somewhere. Once you copy it, you will get 3 file in that installations file. You will get it. Just start install. Just go through the process. Give acceptance, agree. Yeah, install it. It might take some time since so according to your capability of your system, it will in this step it will take some time. Play ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ಯಾ? Okay. and you can install. If you have any issue, you can contact us. Thank you.